Race fans, it's once again time for the traditional singing of Back Home Again in Indiana. And once again, it is my privilege to introduce to you Mr. Jim Neighbors.
The Indianapolis Motor Speedway, the original proving ground of man and machine. For over 115 years, this rectangular oval has laid host to innovation, jubilation, and devastation. Millions have braved to this hallowed piece of Indiana soil to lay eyes to the spectacle that is the Indianapolis 500. And for 75, it became their final destination. This is their stories, the lives and legacies of those 75 souls lost at Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Through the fields I used to roam, when I dream about the moonlight on the Wabash, how I've longed for my Indiana home. As the tradition of balloons
Born March 30th, 1879 in West Farnham, Quebec, to the parents of Louise and Marie, Wilfrid A. Bourc would move at a young age to Massachusetts, where he would grow up and become involved with local automaker Knox. William, as what many called them, went from assembly line to race car driver for the company, the definition of self-made man. His career for the company was respectable, having solid finishes among many of the early years' trophy races, and by 1909, he had heard of a new place to showcase their automobiles, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Knox toured Bourc out there to run the 250-mile Presto Light Trophy race. He would run the event with fellow riding mechanic Harry Hulcom, and driving the number 3 car, they would go out and run to lap 58, where coming out the final turn, their car would turn over and crash at full speed into a fence at the start of the front stretch. It would pin both Bourc and Hulcom inside the vehicle, both men having extreme head and limb injuries. Hulcom and Bourc would pass away before getting to the hospital, and it is believed the cause of the accident was a rear wheel coming undone on the car, causing loss of control. Harry A. Hulcom, born February 26, 1886 in Granville, Massachusetts, was just like his riding partner. He was raised in northeast of America and attended the Westfield High School, becoming a captain of the baseball team. As an internship, he began work at Knox Automobiles, based not too far away from where he graduated. And within a couple of years, he had become a respected test driver for Knox. 1909 was to be his first year in official racing. And under the wing of the experienced William Bourc, they began their year at the Presto Light Trophy race. After the aforementioned incident claiming Hulcom and Bourc, Knox withdrew completely from the August events and went home. Both drivers would be taken back home and laid to rest in their home state of Massachusetts. Bourc 30 and Hulcom only 23 years old. Claude Stewart Kellum, born July 19, 1874 in Kokomo, Indiana, grew up on his family farm with parents John and Carrie. He would eventually stray closer to the growing metro of Indianapolis and meet his wife, which he married in 1899. The couple would have 2 sons, Paul, Carl, and by 1909 was pregnant with a third. Claude would become a renowned mechanic at National Motor Vehicle Company and would be picked to be the riding mechanic for national driver Johnny Aiken. In the August 21st event at the Speedway, the two would spirit off to an early lead, but slowly the car faded as the cylinder head cracked. Eventually, they would fall completely out of the event. As Kellum voiced extreme frustration over the failed attempt, the second National Motor Company car pulled in with a battery issue. Robert Lynn, the riding mechanic for that car, would get out and during replacing the battery faint, giving Kellum an opportunity to help win the event for his company. He would hop in with Charles Mertz, chasing the prestigious Wheeler-Shebler Trophy. As the race passed by 5 o'clock local, Mertz would suddenly lose control due to a massive rut in the dirt racing surface. The car would smash through a fence, hit a ditch, and then crash into a crowd of spectators who had been instructed to leave the area they were in for safety reasons. They ignored that instruction due to the police leaving shortly after, and many would be injured due to them standing in the unsafe area. As the car came to rest, 2 spectators and Claude Kellum would be the 3 fatalities of the accident. By some sort of miracle, Charlie Mertz, the driver, would actually walk away from this wreck, completely uninjured. Born in Indianapolis, Indiana on November 2nd, 1870, James West was a Hoosier through and through. He grew up in the suburbs of Indy and became a local meat cutter and married his wife Anna, who helped raise his stepdaughter. Attracted to the new speedway, he went and was killed when Mertz's car tumbled into the crowd he was in and killed him, leaving behind his respectful career and his family. Born January 27, 1882, Omar Jalif was the second spectator killed that day in Indy. Originally from Franklyn, Indiana, he went to the track with friend Laura Vandiver, a local farmer he was working for at the time. The two decided to watch the incredible spectacle that was the Wheeler-Shebler race, but they struggled to find a seat in the stands, pushed them to walk somewhere else, and they had paused just for a moment to watch the leaders go by before the wreck occurred. The car struck Omar, killing him instantly, whilst Laura, who was standing directly next to him, was uninjured. Omar, or Jack as his family nicknamed him, left behind his brother Ed and Carl, and sisters Osiah and Ruth, along with parents Joseph and Amanda. Both spectator deaths that day would be used in a case brought by Claude Kellum's wife, who sued the National Motor Company and the Speedway for improper practices. She would win $7,000 from damages in the suit, equivalent to $250,000 in today's money. The deaths and lawsuits would eventually push the Speedway to pave the racetrack with brick instead of dirt. Thomas A. Kincaid, born June 28, 1887 in Madison County, Indiana. Tommy, or Tom, grew up in the growing area of Indianapolis and eventually began working for the National Motorcycle Company. For them, he became a competitive rider, winning countless races in motorcycles and cars. In 1910, he would win the Presto Light Trophy race, a 100-mile event held in late May. Building recognition at just the age of 23 years old, Kincaid would be running a test session at the Speedway on July 6, 1910. He would lose control of his vehicle and veer off the embankment in turn 2. He would crash violently. The car would land on Tommy, killing him instantly. Thomas, at the time of his death, was a rising motor racing star, but sadly his career and life were cut short. Samuel Parker Dixon, born May 21, 1887 in Chicago, Illinois, was the son of a newspaper writer and one of 7 children. Through growing up in the Midwest, Sam would graduate high school and become a mechanic for the American Simplex Motor Car Company. His impressive work with the company put him in line to become a driver for the manufacturer. Part of that development process was to become a riding mechanic. Signed the car number 44 with driver Bob Greiner, they attempted the first ever Indianapolis 500. On the 13th lap of the race, making their first start together, the front wheel would fall off, sending the car into a spin. The car would eventually roll over, launching Greiner from the car and knocking him unconscious. Dixon would be trapped in the car as it rolled over repeatedly, and eventually came to rest on its front, crushing Sam in the car and killing him instantly. The young man would become the first fatality in the history of the Indianapolis 500, and would leave behind Father Maxwell, Mother Martha, and 6 brothers and sisters. Harry Thomas Martin, born September 12, 1888, had built a reputation for being a top riding mechanic early on in his career. Riding with Joe Dawson to his 1912 Indianapolis 500 victory, he was touted as the next big thing in the motor racing scene. The Stutes Motor Company would sign him, with the president of the company, Harry C. Stutes, putting him in some races at the end of 1912 as a riding mechanic. On a practice run in June of 1913, Martin was turning some laps in front of Stutes, who was present at the track. He eventually indicated to him to slow down for the forthcoming lap, indicating something could possibly be wrong. Martin did, before mysteriously speeding up off the final corner and then suddenly having the right front wheel fall off. The car slammed into the wall and turned over, trapping Martin and his riding mechanic, Frank Agan, inside the race car. Agan would be seriously hurt, whilst Harry Martin would be killed instantly. Devastating blow to Stutes and the rest of the racing world that such a young man with so much potential was taken before he could even prove himself. He left behind his parents Edward, Jonah, siblings Robert, William, Omar, Edna, and Ivy. Possibly one of, if not the first Swedish driver to attack the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, Albert Johnson was sent to the Speedway by the Packard Motor Car Company with 21-year-old Ross Robinson. The two young drivers hit the bricks on October 4th and had a fast lap of 89 miles an hour. They sailed down the backstretch where the car lost the tire, causing it to turn over and barrel roll down the back straight. Both Albert and Ross were severely injured, Johnson losing his arm and having a fractured skull, being taken to the hospital where he was put under operation early in the morning. Early in the morning on October 6th, he'd pass away during said operation, leaving not much known about him. It didn't help that he was an immigrant from Sweden and didn't have much record of being here, and thus his body was laid to rest in Forest Lawn Cemetery in Detroit, Michigan. During World War I, the Speedway became a development facility for aircraft. Many of the U.S. aviation development was helped through the Speedway. And during this time, apparently one airman was killed at the facility, but it was never specified as to who or what happened. The only information known was to be of a landing crash, sometime during the First World War. There are also various unconfirmed reports of other servicemen dying at the Speedway, which if that is the case, to every serviceman who sacrificed their life for the sake of aviation, may they all rest in peace. Being a lawyer from Washington, D.C., Arthur Thurman would not be your picturesque race car driver. However, he and riding mechanic Nicholas Molinaro were charging through the north end on the 44th lap of the 1919 Indy 500. The car would slam the outside wall with tremendous force, Thurman sadly being killed instantly, whilst Molinaro, while seriously hurt, would survive the incident. Not much is known about Arthur, but to his family and friends, may he rest in peace. During the 1919 Indianapolis 500, about 50 laps after the tragic death of Arthur Thurman, Louis Lecoq and riding mechanic Robert Bandini were racing along in their Duesenberg Romer. Speeding along in their number 15, they came through the south end of the Speedway and suddenly exploded. Unknowing to them, a leak in the gas tank had been ignited by a spark, and at speed the car combusted. It rolled over a couple times before stopping and pinning both drivers inside the burning machine. Both driver and riding mechanic would burn to death just past Grandstand G, becoming the second fatal accident in the first half of that year's Indianapolis 500. Louis Bennett Lecoq was a native of Marion County, Iowa, and is unknown as to what extended family he did leave behind, but may he rest in peace. Robert Monroy Bandini, the young 22-year-old riding mechanic with LeCoy, was originally from Los Angeles, California. He grew up with his grandparents until their passing while he was a toddler. He was soon admitted into the Roman Catholic Orphan Asylum in San Francisco, and was in line to inherit 1/6 of an estate his grandparents had held, an estate worth $7 million, or in today's money, $226 million, with modern-day money of $38 million allocated to him from his grandparents. He used his wealth growing up to pursue autosport. And weirdly enough, Robert never wanted to actually be a driver. Instead, he wanted to own the car and be a riding mechanic, whilst the drivers he hired were his employees. Sadly, Robert was killed before he was old enough to achieve a potential racing empire. Robert had no known family, and he was buried in Shiloh Cemetery in Windsor, California. The first person to pass the Speedway, born in the 20th century, was sadly a young 15-year-old boy. Bert S. Shup from West Lafayette, Indiana. He was attending the 1923 Indy 500 with 7 other boys he went to school with. Standing just off of the exit at Turn 2, Bert watched cars sprint by with buddies William Goetz and Charles Elliott. Suddenly, driver of the number 29 Durant Miller machine, Tom Alley, hit a seam in the track, spinning the car out. He nailed the exit of the Turn 2 wall right where the boys were watching through the cracks of the wood fence. The car ran down most of the schoolboys, most of which were hurt but not seriously. Bert, however, was the one who took the worst impact, being knocked unconscious and suffering a fractured skull. He was rushed to the hospital where sadly he passed away that evening, leaving behind his father Vernon J. Shup, Dorothy, and 4 sisters, Nellie, Mary, Dorothy Alice, and Doris. He was laid to rest in Grandview Cemetery. At the time, the youngest Indy 500 driver ever, Herb Jones, the local favorite, was driving number 29. He placed 19th in the 1925 Indy 500 at only 21 years of age. He did so after a horrific accident where the car barrel rolled whilst on fire, with Jones still inside. He was carried to the hospital where he swore to come back in 1926. He brought the 7th place finishing car from 1925, piloted by Ralph De Palma, and attempted to qualify that machine on May 27, 1926. At a speed of 105.67 miles on his first lap of 4, he sailed into turn 4 and clipped the inside wall. The car darted across the racetrack, rolling over and slamming the outside wall, finally rolling to a stop about 200 yards past the initial impact. Herb from the rollover had serious head injuries and was transported to the hospital where his mother was with him at his bedside when he passed away. Herb at the time was only 22 years old and had done many impressive things in not only his driving career but his life. He attended the Benjamin Harrison School and worked at the Hag Drum Company, where he was a chauffeur for Miss Lenore Hag, who in return financed his sprouting racing career. The team, meanwhile, in a very sick turnaround, rebuilt the car and requalified it with 1924 24-hour of Le Mans winner John Duff. He would drive that car to a 9th place finish. Meanwhile, Herbert Jones would be laid to rest in Crown Hill Cemetery. Originally from Los Angeles, California, William Ketley Spence began his racing career on the local dirt tracks of Southern California. He was only 17, and he soon became one of the most well-respected drivers of his era. He would win races at Ascot Speedway in 1926, and he would win the 1927 NARA Championship. In 1928, he became a relief driver for Billy Arnold, where he completed 78 of the 200 laps of the race for him. He later scored a couple top 5s to end off the AAA schedule for 1928, and landed him a ride for the 1929 Indianapolis 500. During the race, early on, he would lose control in turn 2, hit the inside wall with his right front wheel. The car bounced and then rolled partially, ejecting Spence and fracturing his skull. He would later succumb to the injury, and even though Spence was 22, he'd been married for 3 years to his wife Vivian, who he left behind along with his mother Anna, stepfather Grover, and grandmother Lena. Where Bill was laid to rest in Forest Lawn Cemetery is a wreath in the shape of a 10, dedicated to his car number. James Paul Marshall Jr. was a local to Indianapolis. He lived in Detroit for a few years, rising through the ranks of the automobile industry. In high regard with Duesenberg, he was picked to be riding mechanic with car number 36, his brother Cy, the driver. The two brothers raced through turn 3 on lap 30 of the 1930 Indianapolis 500. They lost control and hit the wall, the car ramping off of it and launching back to the inside of the track. They landed from the fall an estimated 25 feet, Cy being seriously injured and Paul losing his life. James Paul Marshall would be laid to rest in Crown Hill Cemetery, leaving behind his brother and family. Joseph Casia was an Italian immigrant from Napoli, Italy. Early on, they moved to Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. and there he began his love for racing, becoming a mechanic and helping his brother Tony become a race car driver. By 1930, Joe himself began racing, entering and competing in the 1930 Indianapolis 500. During the event, he would crash out and finish 24th, but Cassia continued. On May 26, 1931, whilst practicing for qualifying, Cassia and his number 38, along with his riding mechanic, Clarence Grove, would lose control at over 100 miles an hour and jump over the turn 2 wall. They would strike a tree, cracking the fuel cell and causing a massive fire. Both driver and mechanic remained trapped in the car, as both sadly would perish. Joe would be brought back to Delaware County, Pennsylvania, where he would be laid to rest. Another driver from Pennsylvania, Clarence W Grove, grew up within a mile of the Cassia family, and assumedly the two families worked closely to achieve their racing dreams. At only 23 years old, Clarence left behind his father Charles, mother Laura, and siblings Herbert and Margaret. During the 1931 Indy 500, Billy Arnold would be leading with under 40 to go. Suddenly, his rear axle would break, sending him hard into the wall. The one tire would break off and fly out of the racetrack and over the grandstands. In the front yard of the now empty plot at 2316 Georgetown Road stood Wilbur Clinton Brink, a young 11-year-old boy who was playing by himself in his front yard. The tire would strike Wilbur in the head, killing him. His family had just recently moved to the area, happy to join the recently incorporated new town of Speedway. Young Wilbur Brink left behind his parents Harvey and Elma, siblings Charles, Harvey Jr., Betty, Laverne, and Richard T. A native to Indianapolis, Harry P. Cox grew up with the Speedway always near him. He joined the Indiana National Guard and became an expert parachute jumper. Eventually, he would land a role as Benny Benefield's riding mechanic. During practice less than a week before the 1932 running, heading into turn 1, the tire would fly off of the 73 car they were driving, causing the car to slam and then jump the wall. They would crash into a tree. Cox would be killed, as Benefield would survive the incident with serious injuries. However, he would swear to never race again in honor of his fallen mechanic, who left behind his father Irwin and Alice, and 3 sisters Ruby, Bernice, and Miss George Lindley. He was buried at Memorial Park Cemetery. Originally from Plymouth, Pennsylvania, Milt would meet his wife in auto racing, and together the two would race cars and motorcycles across the country. They began living in Cleveland, working for a painting company, eventually landing a ride in the 1925 Indy 500, where he finished 20th. In 1930, he would own the car L Hulcom would drive to a 5th place finish. And in 1931, he was recorded to have raced in 75 motoring events across the country. On Friday before the 1932 Indy 500, Milton C. Jones Sr. was practicing when he nailed the turn 2 wall at excessive speeds. It jumped the wall and overturned, crushing Milt. And 5 hours later, after the accident, he would succumb to his wounds. His riding mechanic was also seriously hurt, but survived, and Milt left behind his wife and son, along with his mother. During warm-ups for qualifying for the 1933 Indianapolis 500, Ura Denver Orem, known as Bill Denver, was driving car number 42 on a warm-up lap with riding mechanic Bob Hurst. The 32-year-old was a night shift factory supervisor from Pennsylvania. Not much is known about how the incident started, but Denver and Hurst would wreck over the wall and slam into a tree, launching both of them from the car and killing them instantly. Bill left behind friends and family and was buried in Audubon, Pennsylvania. Hugh Hurst, or just Bob, was a local man from the area of Indiana. Not much is known about him, sadly, in regards to what he did prior to racing, but he was laid to rest when he passed in Washington Park East Cemetery in Indianapolis. Growing up on the west side of Indianapolis, it drew Mark W. Billman into the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. So much so that he dropped out of the 8th grade to pursue his dream, and got a job at the Ford Motor Company. He finally got a ride at 18 years old, and across the late 20s and early 1930s, he would win over 50 races across the Midwest. He would finally get a ride in the 1933 race, starting 22nd with riding mechanic Elmer Lombard. 80 laps in, they would crash in turn 1, injuring Lombard and killing Billman. Mark left behind his parents Nicholas and Anna, along with his 4 siblings, Fidelia, Modesta, Luke, and Paul. Similar to Mark Billman, Les Spangler was also a rookie in the 1933 Indianapolis 500. On the 133rd lap of the race, Malcolm Fox would spin out, losing a wheel and stopping in the racing groove. Spangler couldn't avoid the Studebaker and rolled the car, killing he and his riding mechanic G. L. Jordan. Lester Spangler was from Brooke, Indiana, and left behind friends and family. Glen L Jordan, or nicknamed Monk, was another Indiana native. His death at the Speedway marked the deadliest running of the month of May up to that point, with 5 fatalities. And Monk would leave behind his father Morris, mother Lenora, and siblings Walter, Russell, Coem, Raleigh, Jane, Maud, and Nellie. Native of Knoxville, Tennessee, Albert Jacob Kreis, or Pete, was a construction engineer. His family was well respected, and it got him a ride with car owner Harry Hartz. During practice on May 25, 1934, Pete and riding mechanic Bob Hahn would lose control coming off of turn 1. They would jump the wall and slam into a tree, killing both Pete and Bob. Pete left behind his parents John and Ida, along with siblings Ray, John, Edith, and Ida. At only 21 years of age, William Robert Hahn was quite a driver for his time. Living all over the country, he competed in various AAA races. In his original home state of California, Hahn would take over relief duties for a driver during a race at the Gilmore Gold Cup. During the event, he would lose control and be seriously injured, being the potential reason why, for that year's Indy 500, he was to be a riding mechanic, not a driver. Bob would leave behind his wife Doris and son William. John C. Franklyn, or as he raced by, Johnny Hanan, was the son of Czechoslovakian parents who migrated to the U.S. in the early 20th century. While he was born here, he actually moved back and was raised in Czechoslovakia. He would eventually come back in 1925, and he started off driving delivery trucks between Philadelphia and New York for a furniture store. He also made some money being an amateur boxer, having a record of 13-1. He chose racing though, over boxing, and in his first competitive event, he won. Then in 1931, he won the NARA Championship, and throughout his career he became an incredible driver, mastering the treacherous Langhorne Speedway. While an ace on dirt, he never drove on asphalt, making concern for good friend Fred Wanai, a veteran of the Speedway. He told Hanan to not go hard for multiple laps and feel out the brick surface for the first time he was on it. Johnny didn't listen, and halfway through his first lap, went full bore in the turn 3. He lost control and slammed the wall. He flew over the barrier and landed, being killed on impact. His riding mechanic Oscar Reeves survived. The death of John C. Franklyn set the standard for what we now call today as rookie orientation. Later, after Hanan's death on the same day, Hartwell Wilburn Stubblefield, a veteran of the Indy 500, finishing 5th in the 1933 running, took to the track. The man from Los Angeles built his name at the Ascot Speedway. And with riding mechanic Leo Whitaker, he and Stubby ran a qualifying run in their Buick when they lost control and were killed both in an accident at the Speedway. Not many details are known about Stubby's accident, but he left behind his mother Della, father Mike, along with 2-year-old daughter Patsy. Leo was a fellow co-driver with Stubby, and after both were killed tragically, they were interred next to one another back in California. Even though Leo H Whitaker was actually born in Norton, Kansas, he left behind his mother Haiti and sisters Madeline, Marie, and Irene in California. Born in Harmon, Illinois, Clay F. Weatherly had an opportunity at racing greatness. Qualifying 25th, driving a car that 9 days prior Johnny Hahn was driving when he was tragically killed, Weatherly started the 1935 running off great, until on the 9th lap. He'd lose control and go straight through the turn 4 wall. Weatherly was also a rookie, and again another death this abrupt and with a rookie mistake contributed to the beginning of rookie orientation. Clay left behind his mother Minnie and would be buried with his parents in Palmyra Cemetery. Otto R Road had worked with Champion spark plugs for 22 years as a chief engineer. On May 28, 1937, he and multiple others would be down on pit lane during practice, tending the Studebaker belonging to Vern Ordoff. On track, Overton Phillips' number 66 Duesenberg suddenly caught fire when the crankshaft broke and penetrated the gas tank. He veered in the pit lane, crashing into the aforementioned Studebaker. Many were injured, and Otto R Road, who had recently become vice president of Champion Spark Plugs, was seriously injured. 4 days later after the incident, Otto would pass away from his injuries. Road was the son of former German immigrants who moved to Saginaw, Michigan. He left behind his daughters Bertha, Erna, Hulda, and sons Otto and Erwin, along with his wife Edith and daughter Doris. George Franklyn Warford would also pass after the same incident Otto Road would be taken in. He originally was at the track looking for a job as a mechanic, trying to lend his knowledge from his time in the service back in the day during the First World War. George would leave behind his wife Adeline, who would sue the track for damages, and they would eventually reach a settlement within a month after George's death. Later that same day as the pit incident, Frank McGurk and rider mechanic Albert S. Apalco would be making a qualifying run. Albert was originally from Pennsylvania. At the time was a resident of Gary, Indiana. He grew up being a delivery boy, making his debut in the 1935 Indy 500, riding with George Connor as a riding mechanic. He and McGurk would have a connecting rod break, causing the car to flip, with both men being ejected. McGurk would survive, whilst Albert would not. After the two incidents where mechanical failures due to vibrations occurred, Speedway officials paved the corners and short chutes of the track to try and lessen the vibrations and the beating the cars were taking on the track. Albert left behind his mother Elizabeth and siblings Harold and Elsie. Everett Spence was a local probation officer from Terre Haute, Indiana. He went to the 1938 500 with a group of others attending the event, and was standing on some scaffolding, partying as the race went on. Coming off of turn 2, Emil Andres crashed and flipped violently. One of the wheels went flying and hit Everett Spence in the head. He would die from his injuries, leaving behind his wife and 3 children, who were sadly there to witness the accident occur. In 1938, Floyd Marion Roberts was on top of the world. The do-it-himself man from Jamestown, North Dakota, had immortalized himself on the Borg Warner Trophy. Coming into the 1939 Indy 500, Roberts was not only reigning winner of the event, but champion of the series for 1938. As Floyd was racing along in the 1939 running, Bob Swanson, who had just taken over relief dirties for Ralph Hepburn, lost control off of turn 2. Floyd couldn't avoid the accident and slammed into Swanson. He jumped the front end of the car and through the fencing, slamming into a tree, killing him instantly. The 39-year-old racing ace left behind his wife Edna and 2 children, Betty and Billy. Charles Lawson Harris was a well-respected figure around the Speedway. Many times he had worked with great drivers like Rex May and Louis Mayer as a mechanic. Just in 1939 had Harris finished 4th in the event, and late in September was conducting a test for Firestone. With Babe Stapp as a driver and Harris riding as a mechanic, they sailed around the track at around 115 miles an hour. Suddenly, a tie rod broke, and the car swerved into the outside wall. Stapp suffered minor injuries, while Harris was ejected, losing his helmet and slamming off the asphalt. 2 hours after the incident, Harris would pass away. The native Indiana would leave behind his 16-year-old son Robert and mother Maud, along with sisters Marjorie and brother William. Originally from Cleveland, Ohio, Vernon Bailey would move to the Motor City, becoming an innovative mechanic. One of the things that Bailey did was become the first man to compete in the 500 with a rear-engine car. Attempting to make his 6th Indy 500, he was piloting the rear-engine machine with great success. Suddenly, the car lost control, though, and slid into the concrete wall. The car then slid back down the track and into the guardrail. It's estimated that he made contact at 125 miles an hour. Through a horrific miracle, the wood guardrail wouldn't break under the pressure. The fuel cell would explode and catch George on fire. He got out and ran to a nearby photographer, Eddie Hoff, who did everything possible to beat out the burning man. Sadly, Bailey would die of his burns. And whilst his name may not be widely known around the Speedway, the motor configuration he ran and blazed the path for would be the one that would dominate the Speedway over 80 years past his death. William A. Kantan from Paris, Illinois, had a long career in Detroit developing motor cars. He became a respected driver eventually and would finish second in Indy 500. After the war, Shorty would return to the Speedway and qualify second row for the 1947 running. And 100 miles into the event, going through turns 1 and 2, Bill Holland would lose control in front of Shorty. And the decision of whether to strike Holland or the wall, Catlin chose the wall. A decision, whilst most likely saving Bill Holland's life, claimed Shorty's. 2 funerals would be held for Shorty, as he was a highly respected driver at the Speedway, an even more highly regarded man. Ralph Rodulphus Hepburn was a staple of the Indianapolis 500 for years. Competing in 15 events and finishing second in the 1937 race, Ralph was well respected around the track. At 52 years old, Ralph drove for millionaire and businessman Lew Welch, and he originally wasn't going to drive because of his age, but was requested to step back in and attempt to qualify the car in because of poor performance. Ralph, qualifying the car, lost control and spun in turn 3. He kept his foot in it, trying to countersteer the car, the front wheels eventually grabbing and throwing him head-on into the wall. Ralph died instantly, as many believed the car just got away from him. However, later reports suggest that people saw smoke coming from the car going into turn 3, making someone believe that some sort of mechanical issue occurred. Ralph left behind his wife Ida and daughter Joanne. A local in Indianapolis, George Albert Metzler, was a veteran of World War II. He'd become a well-respected car mechanic and was given a driving opportunity at his first 500 for Wilbur Shaw in the number 67. He passed rookie orientation, and during practice for the event, would lose control in turn 1 and hit the outside wall. He suffered massive head and chest injuries, and passed a few days after in the hospital. George left behind his wife Marjorie and their 14-month-old son, George Jr. A long-standing veteran of the Speedway, Chet Miller was widely known as the oldest driver competing in the event. Going for his 17th Indy 500, he'd actually achieved 5 top 10s and a best of 3rd place in 1938. In 1953, driving the same car Ralph Hepburn died in 5 years prior, and 1 day short of the anniversary, Miller would have an accident that all accounts say was identical to the one that occurred with Hepburn, and he would lose control just for a second and apply throttle to overcorrect, going head-on into the wall. It wasn't in the same place, however, this being on the other end of the track. Chester Joseph Miller left behind his wife Gertrude and a successful upholstery business. 1953 was possibly the hottest Indy 500 ever. Surface temperatures on the track were measured at over 130 degrees. Thus many drivers were succumbing to heat. One of those drivers was Carl Eugene Scarborough. Carl was suffering in the heat, feeling sickly for a long period of time. Carl eventually pulled in on lap 69 as the crew struggled to service the car in the heat. Fuel touched the exhaust and it combusted. The firemen on scene quickly sprayed out the flame with a foam that was incredibly cold. It covered Carl in the car. They eventually got him out and replaced him with Bob Scott. He'd finished the race 12th for Carl, an incredible effort. Scarborough, meanwhile, was helped to some shade, where he fainted. For hours they would attempt to revive him, but never could, and he would pass away from heat prostration. Scarborough was an immaculate driver, winning multiple lower division championships, and left behind his wife and 2 children. Manuel Leónidas Ayulo from Burbank, California, was a highly successful mechanic with much of his ancestry from Peru. Ayulo built a name for himself as a great driver in California before hitting the national tour. There he would finish second 7 times in his career without winning, and finally would win at Darlington Raceway. In his first 4 attempts at the 500, his personal best came in 1954. He would get 13th, and also helped Jack McGrath finish 3rd in 1951 when he drove relief. Preparing for the 1955 event, Manny worked relentless, straight through the night on some occasions. He was pursuing breaking the 140-mile-an-hour barrier, which would put him on pole. On May 14th, he began practice and sailed in the 1. The car went straight, and he slammed into the concrete wall. He was not wearing a seatbelt when this happened, and had countless wrenches and tools strewn throughout his pockets. He was killed nearly instantly, with many believing that sleep deprivation contributed heavily to the accident, leaving behind his friends and family that were all hoping he would break that 140-mile-an-hour barrier. Potentially the greatest driver of his time, William John Vukovich Sr. had won the last 2 Indianapolis 500s at the time of his death. He was on pace to win 3 in a row in 1955. Nicknamed the Mad Russian, he was leading early and came through turn 2 to see a wreck on the 56th lap. Roger Ward had broken an axle off a 2 and hit the backstretch wall. The car landed in the middle of the track where Al Keller swerved and clipped Johnny Boyd, who was also trying to avoid the wreck. Boyd hit Vukovich, who jumped the wall and went over end. Bill was partially decapitated by the crossover bridge on the backstretch, and he flipped out to a parked car where he landed and then caught fire. Bill left behind his wife Escher, son Bill Jr., daughter Marlene, brothers Eli and Mike, and sisters Florence, Ann, Mary, and Dorothy. Originally from Denver, Colorado, Keith Phillip Andrews began his racing career in midgets. In the late 1940s, he would win his state's midget championship and also win a division in the Pikes Peak Hill Climb. In 1955, he entered his first Indy 500, finishing in the back half of the field. For 1957, he served as backup driver for Giuseppe Farina, the 1950 Formula One champion. He began testing for Farina on May 15, 1957. He would lose control in turn 4, and for over 200 yards, Andrews would fight the car before backing it into the wall. The backward impact gave him fatal neck injuries, leaving behind his wife Glenise and 2 children, Marilyn and Sandra Lee. Patrick James O'Connor was a fan favorite through and through. He's featured on Sports Illustrated, a local to Indiana, and a repeated midget car champion. All he needed to complete his incredible career was the Indianapolis 500. The start of the 1958 running, driver Ed Elysian and pole sitter Dick Rathman raced hard in the turn 3. Elysian would lose control on the inside of Rathman, with both men slamming into the turn 3 wall. Jimmy Reese, the third-place starter, who was relatively inexperienced, saw the wreck and slammed the brakes whilst turning for the infield. He would immediately spin the car out, helping to add what would become to a 15-car stack-up on the first lap of the Indy 500. O'Connor and the car in front of him would slam into Reese, Pat jumping the car and reportedly sailing 50 feet through the air and landing upside down. It'd kill him instantly and relieve him of the pain of several side-winding flips, then being accompanied with a fuel cell being split open and the car burning to a hulk. Many say this is possibly one of the most graphic accidents in the race's history. And again, O'Connor was a fan favorite, and the incident was in full view of the entire field of drivers and fans. He left behind his wife Annalise and 18-month-old son Jeffrey. You will know his younger brothers Bobby and Al, but many know of Jeremy Michael Unser Jr. He was the first Unser to take to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, being injured in his first attempt, as he broke his arm in the huge Lap 1 wreck that took Pat O'Connor. On May 2nd, 1959, Unser was coming through turn 4 when he lost control and hit the outside wall before rebounding and hitting the inside wall. The fuel tank began to leak and caught fire, severely burning Unser. He was taken to the hospital and died 15 days later after his crash. His death mandated the use of fire suits for the Indy 500 moving forward, and Jerry would leave behind his wife Jean and 2 sons, Jerry III and Johnny. Originally from Redlands, California, Bob Courtner was the 1957 Bay Cities racing champion. Coming to Indy in 1959 for his first go at the greatest spectacle, he was a veteran of racing for a decade and was potentially facing one of his greatest challenges yet. He went through rookie orientation well, and the next day took to his first laps of practice. Going into turn 3, Courtner went high and, according to multiple reports, was caught by a gust of wind. He spun into the infield before correcting back up onto the track and slamming into the outside wall. It was another instance of an overcorrection and applying too much throttle to contradict the errant spin. Robert Charles Courtner was a World War II aviation machinist. He left behind his wife Marilyn and parents Guy and Anna, along with brother Henry. During the 1960 Indy 500, a scaffolding holding more than 80 people capsized when many of the men and women standing on it moved to one side. They were waving the cars as they passed by on warm-up laps. And William Chesrone Craig, originally from Brockton, Illinois, had moved to Zionsville, Indiana, and were on the scaffolding when it tipped over. Craig would take the brunt of the fall, breaking his neck and taking his life. Another who would perish the same way as Craig was Fred Harry Linder. Fred fell off of the 30-foot scaffolding as it capsized, and Linder was actually the owner and operator of said scaffolding. And the incident made the Speedway outlaw any such constructions of structures moving forward for safety reasons. Born in Tinley Park, Illinois, Melvin Eugene Bettenhausen became one of the iconic and loved drivers of the Speedway post-World War II. Although he did start his driving career before the war, it was after that Tony's career really took off. In his 14 starts in the Indy 500, Tony had a best finish of 2nd place in 1955, and had come close on many other occasions. In 1961, at age 44, he was at the Speedway to watch Paul Russo turn some laps. Paul, after his run, said he could not figure out exactly what was wrong with the car and the setup, and he asked Bettenhausen to take some laps to see if he could figure it out. Tony got in, and like many times before, began driving around the Speedway. Down the front stretch he went, and suddenly the car slapped the wall going into the corner. It jumped the barrier, eventually flipping upside down on fire in a patch of grass just in front of the grandstands. Tony was dead when rescuers got to him, and after inspection, it was found that a measly bolt in the right front suspension fell out, causing Tony to lose control as he did. Bettenhausen left behind his wife Valerie and children Gary, Merle, Tony Lee, and Suzanne. The local man from Danville, John Frances Massario, was known for being the principal of Ben Davis Jr. High School and a volunteer safety crew member for the Indy 500. During the 1961 running of the race, Eddie Johnson would crash on the 128th lap. The driver was alright, and as safety crews convened, John would help clean up the accident before climbing back on the truck to leave the scene. He would slip, and fellow crewman Johnny Williams, thinking that Massario had gotten back on the truck, backed up and accidentally ran over his fallen team member. John would be killed by the helpless accident and would leave behind his wife Betty and 5 soon-to-be 6 children, Mark, Michael, Denny, Beth Ann, and Diane. David George MacDonald was a young and upcoming driver, trying to get his first attempt at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He was hired by car owner Mickey Thompson, who had designed a horrifically innovative machine. The car, while somewhat new age and cutting edge for its time, had horrific aerodynamic disadvantages and handling characteristics overall. The car would barely go in a straight line by itself, let alone a pack of 33 cars. And when MacDonald started the race 14th, he charged through the field. He passed many cars before losing control and hitting the inside wall. The car exploded in a mushroom cloud of smoke and fire and slid back up the track. Eddie Sachs could not see where the car was and guessed the high groove. He would T-bone the wounded MacDonald, killing Sachs instantly, and McDonald would die from serious burns and injuries a few hours later. Dave would be buried in his home state of California, not that far from the man that designed the machine that he'd be killed in, Mickey Thompson. Edward Julius Sachs Jr. was a legend of auto racing from Allentown, Pennsylvania. Coming oh so close to an Indy 500 on multiple occasions, one of his most notable duels was with a young A.J. Foyt, who he'd lose to in 1961 after an all-day battle. Sachs was known as a practical joker and a classic fan favorite. Sadly, as mentioned before, Sachs would lose his life in the 1964 running of the race, with a young Johnny Rutherford following the veteran. Rutherford, wisely trying to get through the opening laps, followed Sachs, who chose wrongly in avoiding McDonald. Rutherford would somehow go under the rear end of Sachs during the impact, and over the top of the destroyed McDonald machine. He was covered in oil and gas, and Rutherford somehow didn't ignite, and he crawled his car back to the inside of Turn 4. When crews inspected the Rutherford machine, they found a lemon on a cord inside the car. After further thought, wondering how that could have gotten there, they came to the conclusion that the lemon was from Eddie Sachs, as he would wear one around his neck to suck on to give him a boost of energy as he would drive. Eddie left behind his wife Nance, son Eddie III, and daughter Catherine. Jerome Urban Albright was a young 17-year-old golf course worker for the track's local golf course. On July 21st, 1964, he and fellow employee James Cross were caught on the course in a thunderstorm. They ran the shelter in an outdoor bathroom structure. The building was sadly struck by lightning, killing both boys hiding inside. Jerry left behind his parents Urban and Margaret, sisters Patricia, Diane, Dolores, Mary, and Kathy. James Patrick Cross was schoolmates with Jerry, and the two were close friends going into their senior year of high school for the fall of 1964. Both played sports quite well, and James left behind his parents and siblings, Lisa, David, William, and Thomas. James J. Charles Roediger from Dixmoor, Illinois, had ran a couple Indy 500s before his third attempt in 1966. Chuck was an experienced driver and notably had a massive crash in 1956 when he had a spectacular accident flipping multiple times in a midget at the Jeffersonville, Indiana midget race. Attempting to qualify for the 1966 event, he would lose control for just a second and slide high before completely losing it and backing it into the turn 1 wall. The impact was so visceral that a steel shaft from the car penetrated nearly a half-foot deep into the wall. Chuck suffered head and neck injuries, slipping into a coma before he would pass away. There are some reports that people believe they saw Rhodey after he crashed actually indicate to safety crew members that he had his vision obscured by some sort of debris when the accident occurred. But many believe that that's also impossible, as such motions, voluntarily at least, couldn't be made possible due to the severe injuries he had. Whatever may have caused the accident, Chuck Rhodey left behind his friends and family. He was only 38 years old. Michael Henderson Spence was born far away from the Speedway in Croydon, England. But in 1968, his path crossed with the iconic racetrack after the tragic death of Jim Clark. Lotus needed another driver for the Indy 500 team, and they invited Spence, who showed up to the Speedway in late April for the first time. Within a week, he set the fastest lap of the month, and to that point, nearly a track record. The team was so impressed, they put Spence in the other car to try and help figure out what was wrong with that car's handling. As he went out on track, he entered turn 1 incorrectly and lost control. He slammed hard into the outside wall. The car eventually came to a stop about 200 yards down the racetrack. When crews got there, his helmet had been torn off in the accident, and he was found unconscious. 4 hours after the crash, Mike Spence would pass away. In reaction to Spence's death, the team would withdraw all cars from the event. James H. Malloy Jr. was originally a resident of Columbus, Nebraska. His driving career, however, took him to Colorado, where he showed his driving skill. In his 4 previous attempts at the 500, Malloy had modest results. Trying for his 5th 500 and just shy of his 40th birthday, he would make a qualifying run, and and on the second lap, sailing into turn 3, he would lose control. In a feeble attempt to correct the slide, he overcorrected and went head-on into the wall. The crash sent debris everywhere, and Malloy was seriously injured. He survived for 4 days until he finally succumbed to his injuries. He left behind his wife Mary and children Jim, Cheryl, and Pat. Art Lee Pollard Jr. was an experienced midget driver of nearly 20 years. He rose through the ranks of his home state of Utah, finally making it to the top level of USAC in 1965. In his mid-40s and attempting for his 6th Indy 500, he was warming up for his qualifying run, and the car would loop at 190 miles an hour in turn 1. He would slam the outside wall. The car would slide 1,500 feet before finally coming to rest. Pollard would pass away from massive internal injuries due to the severe impact, leaving behind his wife Patricia and children Michael and Judy. David Earl Savage Jr. was a young and upcoming driver. Charging through the oatmeal ranks originally from San Bernardino, California, he continued to rise through the ranks under the wing of Dan Gurney, before being seriously hurt at Ontario Speedway. He fought to come back though, and attempted his first Indy 500 in 1972. He had an incredible performance, leading the race and qualifying 4th. In his second attempt, he was part of one of the worst Indy 500s ever. Plagued by rain and ran on a Wednesday, Swede pushed through it all, leading the early portion of the race and then pitting on lap 55. As the cycle would come to an end, Savage would lose control off of 4, either by running on cold tires or possibly by hitting oil put down by Johnny Rutherford, and he would spin hard into the inside wall. The car with full fuel exploded and slid back up on track in a fireball. Savage, during this accident, never lost consciousness and sat through the entire incident talking to medical workers who extracted him and took him to the hospital. There he began to recover, but sadly died from an infection of hepatitis B due to a bad blood transfusion 33 days after the crash. Swede left behind his wife Cheryl and their 6-year-old daughter, along with another that his wife was pregnant with, a baby girl that would be born 3 months after his passing. During Swede Savage's horrific accident, Armando Moreno Terán, a man from Sonora, Mexico, was a pit crewman for Graham McRae's team in the 1973 Indy 500. They were teammates with Savage, and when Terán saw the horrendous crash in front of them on the front stretch, he jumped to action. In a mass of humans rushing to try and help Savage, Terán ran across the pit lane. A fire truck had also seen the accident and sprung on the action as well, driving backwards up the pit lane, trying to get to the accident quicker. Armando didn't look, assuming that no car should be coming in that direction. The fire truck would run down Armando, killing him almost instantly, in front of the full grandstands on the front stretch. The team owner of the cars that Savage and Armando were working for, Pat Patrick, refused to ever talk about this incident for decades, viewing it as one of the worst days of his life. Seated in the grandstands pre-race, Leroy C Elwell will be stricken with a heart attack during pre-race, dying in the grandstands at the age of 64. He was known to have health issues similar to this beforehand, carrying medicine on him to help with this issue during the scene. Elwell was originally from Palm Beach, Florida, left behind various friends and family. Timothy Scott Vale was a young 19-year-old man attending the infamous Snake Pit Party in the infield. During the Friday practices, Vale would be driving his Jeep through the area, but it would turn over and crush his head, killing him. This was when the Snake Pit was in turn 1, and Tim was reportedly trying to avoid a massive mud puddle when he flipped the vehicle. He ejected another passenger from the vehicle as well, a 19-year-old David Stegenmiller, who suffered minor injuries but was able to walk away from the accident. Vale left behind friends and family. Gordon Eugene Smiley originally was just a road course driver, but had dabbled with speedways. Overall, Gordon Smiley did almost anything you could do in motorsports, from a journalist to a driver. In 1982, Gordon, attempting to run the Indy 500, was aiming to try and break the 200-mile-an-hour barrier. Being about 4 miles an hour off, he kept pushing the limits, when suddenly, on his warm-up lap, the car started spinning. Being a road driver, he naturally tried to correct the incident, and then the car bit. He turned hard right and hit the wall head-on, literally evaporating the car around Gordon Smiley, and he'd be killed instantly. When the car was brought back to the garage, there was literally nothing left that was in one piece. Gordon left behind his wife Barbara and parents Jean and Elaine. Lyle George Kurtenbach, originally from Mitchell, South Dakota, was one of the many 300,000 plus race fans that would be making the yearly pilgrimage to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Like always, he attended the race with family from across all parts of the central U.S. And as they had always done, they sat high atop Grandstand K in Turn 3. During the 1987 Indy 500, the number 16, driven by Tony Bettenhausen Jr., lost a wheel on lap 131. Roberto Guerrero had nowhere to go, hit the wheel high over the catch fence. Sadly, it would strike and kill Lyle Kurtenbach, leaving behind his wife Karen and stepdaughter Dawn. Stephen C. White was a local man to Speedway, being a self-employed carpenter. Living with his parents, he left their home late Tuesday night on May 28, 1991. He would not return. White would somehow find a way to break into the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. He would most likely sneak in through the influx of cleaning employees that were hired in the days after the race to try and pick up all the trash for the 1991 event. The IMS security assumed that he possibly was just another one of these temporary employees. He was then able to find an unlocked gate and pulled onto the track towards pit exit. Workers suddenly noticed in the morning a blue GMC pickup truck screaming around the track at around 100 miles an hour. One track worker stated that Stephen was waving at people as he flew by, looking incredibly happy as he drove. As White completed 3 laps, Luther Ray, a worker on the front stretch, took a Dodge Caravan to park it perpendicular across the front stretch, simply putting an obstacle to try and slow the man as the track was far from being fully blocked. With nearly 15 feet on either side of this van, White careened head-on into it at around 90 miles an hour. The impact would kill him instantly, and leave the question of why any of this happened. There is no leads as to why White did any of this, with the only hint being they had been diagnosed with manic depressive disorder, and inside the vehicle they found 2 empty medication containers, leaving the only theory to be that this could have been a psychotic episode. White left behind his parents. Edward Joy Marcello Jr. was a young rookie Filipino driver trying his first attempt at the great race. His father, Edward Sr., was an incredible businessman and helped finance him through Berkeley College, promising him that as a graduation gift, he would finance a long-awaited racing career. The young man building up on his first attempt built an incredible reputation of sportsmanship and nobility among competitors, and many were excited for his first attempt in 1992. Whilst practicing, Marcello would lose control on May 15th and slam the wall in turn 1. He would suffer massive head and neck trauma and pass shortly after the crash. Jovi left behind his wife Irene and daughter Karsten. His wife 3 months later would give birth to his first son, Jovi Nikolai. Scott Everett Brayton was a fan favorite of the IndyCar field during most of the 1990s. Whilst never having incredible successes, his personality and persistence gained the admiration of many who met or watched him race. In 1996, he won the pole for the Indy 500, and many were in jubilation, as Brayton was one of the favorites now to win the event. However, on May 17th, going into turn 2, Brayton's rear tire would deflate, causing him to spin around quickly and harshly slamming the wall. The fastest man in May of 1996 would be rushed to the Indianapolis Methodist Hospital, where he'd be pronounced dead from his injuries. In a dark time for IndyCar and open wheel in general in America, the loss of Scott Brayton after his incredible pole run made everyone doubt more than ever if they did truly love this sport. Brayton left behind his wife Becky and daughter Carly, forever a pole sitter of the greatest spectacle in auto racing. Anthony James Renna was a young Californian driver trying to finally break through the American oatmeal scene. Being the son of Joe and Mary Renna, owners of the Jockey and Meat Company, they were able to humbly finance the early career of Tony. By 2003, Renna, who had been running with Team Kelly, was out of a job due to budget cuts, and was offered a job he couldn't refuse, a contract with Chip Ganassi. In what would be one of his first runs with the team, Ganassi took his young drivers Scott Dixon and Tony Renna to the Speedway. Dixon would run the first day of the test on the 21st. On the 22nd of October, Renna would run as well. Ambient temperature was just above 50 degrees, which could have contributed to the accident. Coming down the backstretch, Renna would lose control and spin in the 3. He would unexplainedly jump the track and go straight into the catch fence at a speed of over 180 miles an hour. Debris would be scattered everywhere, and Renna would die almost instantaneously on impact. Months of investigation went on about how this wreck could have occurred, and what could be done to understand how something like this could have even happened. Today, to honor Renna, there is a memorial fund established in his name. Arthur Eugene Morris was one of the various safety patrol officers working the Speedway grounds during the 2004 Brickyard 400 weekend. Driving a motor scooter, Morris would suffer a heart attack crashing into a concrete wall. He would suffer minor head and neck injuries, and he'd be taken to a local hospital, where he would die from said heart attack. Morris was a longtime veteran of the safety crews at Indianapolis, highly respected among his co-workers at the track, leaving behind many friends and family. Peter James Lenz was a young phenom across two-wheeled machines. Becoming the youngest licensed expert racer for the American Federation of Motorcycles, he also set records for being the youngest winner at only 11 years old. The Vancouver, Washington rider headed on to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, ready to take on another great feat in his young career. On August 29, 2010, Peter was on a warm-up lap for the race when he was coming through Turn 4 on the circuit. He fell and signaled the workers that a rider had fallen. Soon, a pack of 3 other riders flew up on Lenz. 12-year-old Xavier Zayat did not see the fallen Lenz and collided. Paramedics rushed to Peter, but the young 13-year-old was fatally injured. Not only is Lenz the youngest competitor to die at the Speedway, but the only one to do so in a motorcycle event. Peter left behind his parents and 2 sisters. When the founders of the Speedway built the track in 1909, it was with the intention to be a proving ground for automotive engineering genius. That goal was easily accomplished, but the purpose of the Speedway through the century has shifted. Nowadays, it sits as a shrine, not to mechanical genius, but to human courage and perseverance, an everlasting location of enduring progress through the human spirit. And while that cause has claimed the lives of 75, it is cast the same in sterling silver, and while the names of some fallen lay forgotten in the ever-steady march of time, their impact, legacy, and courage stand as a constant reminder of the perseverance found in the human soul. For all who have lost their lives at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, may they forever rest in peace.